Close brace. For JavaScript developers, by JavaScript developers. Here we are again with another episode of 5-Minute React. In our last tutorial, we got MongoDB installed and running. In this tutorial, we're going to take a few minutes to talk to it. I'm going to show this only using a Mac because the process is identical between the two OSs, other than whether you're running terminal windows or command prompts. Or PowerShell, which is just enough like a Unix shell to make you forget you're not using a Unix shell until it doesn't recognize a command and frustrates the hell out of you. The MongoDB daemon and the MongoDB console, which we'll get to, behave exactly the same on both systems. So, if you still have your MongoDB daemon running, awesome. If not, fire that sucker up and then open a new terminal window. As you can see, I've separated the two out so you can see both at the same time, because the MongoDB daemon does stuff when you're connected, either through the console or through a web app. Mostly what it's doing is logging, and honestly when I'm actually developing I basically never look at the daemon, but it can be interesting to see what's going on over there when you're getting started. In your new terminal window, just type Mongo. No D on the end, no config stuff, just the word Mongo. This will launch the Mongo console, which allows you to interact with the database, which is being run by the daemon. You'll get a few basic pieces of information, including a warning about this database being accessible without access control, i.e. a username and password authentication system being enabled. Never fear, Mongo console, we will absolutely enable access control before we start producing code intended for live servers. For right now, we're just messing around. You're left with an input prompt, so let's input something. We'll start with the following command, show DBs. This is going to reveal two extremely empty databases, admin and local. You can ignore them. We're not going to work in either. We're instead going to create our own database in which to work. This next step is really important because if you don't follow the commands exactly, you'll end up jamming data into the wrong place, and then it'll be a pain to retrieve it. So to start, type this, use music list. You'll see the console report that it switched to using a new DB called music list, but if you repeat the show DBs command, you won't see music list in the resulting output. This is because Mongo doesn't actually create the database until you put some data into it. MongoDB allows you to divide your database into subgroups called collections. For example, in a blog app, you might have a users collection and a post collection and perhaps a comments collection. We're going to quickly add some data here, although we're going to blank it before we actually get started on developing music list, which is the app we'll be creating throughout these 5-minute React tutorials. Here, let's add a user. Type the following, db.users.insert, full name, John Smith, email, johnsmith@testemail.com. Hit enter. You'll get the following response, right result and inserted 1. That's a little obtuse, but what it's saying is we inserted your user into the user's collection. Since this is the first time we've done this, it also created the user's collection automatically. And since this is the first time we've done any work at all on the music list DB, it also created that. Pretty handy, huh? Type show DBs again, and you'll see that music list is now there. If you type just DB, it'll show that we're actively working in the music list DB at the moment. And if you type show collections, it'll show our brand new user collection. This is handy if you need to pre-populate data, or if you want to do some manual editing outside of your API, which I never recommend for production purposes, but is often necessary for development purposes, especially early on when you don't actually have an API built yet. You probably noticed that very JavaScript-like syntax that we used above to create our first user. That's one of the really nice things about MongoDB. For JS developers, it feels very intuitive. Let's take a look at the user we created by typing db.users.find, which will output the user object. That's nice enough, but with larger objects, it might get a little cumbersome to have them printed like that. Fortunately, the Mongo console has a handy little method for dealing with that. db.users.find.pretty, which gets you this much nicer output. A big improvement. Note that MongoDB generated its own unique ID for our user. It'll do this for any object you add to any collection. You can override the value manually if for some reason you think it's a good idea, but I wouldn't recommend it. You'll be stepping on lots of functionality that proves really useful down the road. If you really want to add your own ID for tracking purposes, consider a separate key value pair like music list ID 12345 or similar. Let's add a few more users. We don't have to do this with multiple db.users.insert statements. We can stick multiple user objects into that one statement by putting them into an array. I like to start in a text editor and then paste into the console. So let's open Sublime and then type the following, db.users.insert, full name, Jane Doe, email, janedoe@testemail.com, Make sure you have this comma here. Full name, Leslie Tanner. Email, Leslie Tanner at testemail.com. Copy all of this and paste it into your console. You'll get a response back. Bulk write result. Write errors, empty array. Write concern errors, empty array. And inserted 2, and upserted 0, and matched 0, and modified 0, and removed 0, upserted, empty array. Yeah. This not only tells you that we inserted 2 new records, but it also gives you a handy idea of what else you can do with this console, including modifying and removing an entry. Before we do anything else though, let's look at our complete 3-user set by typing db.users.find.pretty. You don't have to put the semicolon in, I do it instinctively. So that looks great, huh? But what if we want to change something? Well, let's do that real quick. Let's say that Jane modified her emails. Go back to Sublime. db.users.update1. Full name, Jane Doe. This is important. String set email janieCakes@burnermail.com. Sounds good. Copy all of that. Paste it into our terminal. What that's doing is saying find a single entry whose full name value is Jane Doe and set her email to something new. It'll result in acknowledged true, matched count 1, modified count 1. Great. We matched one item and modified it. Now, I need to mention here that searching on strings like this is generally not a great idea. You could potentially have multiple users named Jane Doe, after all, and the update1 method is only going to return the first one it finds. If you just used the update method, it'd change all of the returned users' email addresses, which would also suck. The correct way to go, especially once we're building an API, is to do lookups by unique IDs. But I can't really do that here because the IDs your system generates will not be the same as the ones mine generates. So, since this is a limited test, we're just doing the lookup by name. Let's wrap this up by deleting a user. Alas, poor Leslie Tanner has decided that he or she no longer wishes to be a music list member, so it's time to remove that entry from the database. Use the following code. db.users.remove full name Leslie Tanner. That gets us another write result and removed 1. And sure enough, if we do another db.users.find.pretty, we'll see that Leslie has moved to the great beyond, and we've only John and Jane left. That's about it for the basics of interacting with MongoDB. As you can see, everything is done through JavaScript-like commands and results in BSON datasets that look pretty much like the JSON that most web folks have been working with for a while now. That'll come in very handy when we start building our API, which, believe it or not, is not so far away now. We're about to move from setup to coding. The next tutorial will prepare for this by establishing a source control repository with Git and GitHub. See you there.